The craft of writing consists of various aspects, plot and character development being among the most significant, but every fiction writer also has to have some idea of how to present their stories to their audiences. Today I want to talk exclusively about this performative aspect of the writing craft, which you can also call style and which I will refer to as performance. Performance is entirely within the realm of the Jungian cognitive function of extroverted sensing. If you want to know what that is, check out season 1 of this channel where I explain everything about the Jungian cognitive functions and how they influence our fiction writing. Today we'll discuss the nature of extroverted sensing as well as impactfulness. So we are going to have a closer look at the impactors and we will compare them to the attractor writers, the other psychological group. You can either be one or the other. Then we'll list all the various aspects of fiction writing that fall under the umbrella of performance. Then we'll talk about typical mistakes impactor writers make when it comes to performance, and then I'll present some techniques to practice performance that I've picked up from impactor writers, famous and non-famous. Now, the most interesting bit of this video for you, dear impactor viewers, is likely going to be the chapter about the typical mistakes impactor writers make in the name of performance. Everything before that is a lot of technical talk and psychology, so if you don't want to get bogged down in that, I recommend you just jump ahead to that point. Let's get the show on the road. The nature of impactfulness. Like I said, I'm gonna compare the attractors to the impactors here. So first of all, what exactly is the thing that attractor writers want from writing? What do they want from their audiences, basically? They want their stories to be chosen and to connect to people. And having all that gives the attractor a rewarding sense of enjoyment, like something that they feel on the inside. I always feel extremely good when I hear that somebody is reading my story. Impactors, however, care more about what performance they can deliver in order to get a strong reaction out of an audience, right? In other words, it's not about being read by many people, but it's about impacting audiences as much as possible and making them remember the story.
I don't want something that someone reads and they're like, oh, wait, I love that, but now I'm going to forget about it in 2 hours. Like, even if someone didn't even really like this that much, like even if they rate it 3 stars, but they're like, oh, I'm gonna think about this for a while. I almost prefer that over a 5-star, and then you don't think about it ever again.
That is the primary goal. Now you might already wonder, well, those things kind of sort of include each other, right? I'm making sure that my story is impactful by making sure it is desirable. And the story is going to be very desirable if it is very impactful. The point is that that is simply not true, but we're gonna get to that. Another way to distinguish impactors and attractors is by looking at what inspires them to write. Besides writing to explore emotions or to preach a value, impactor writers write to create an experience in an audience, while attractor writers write for their own internal experience and pleasure. Although I want to say that impactor writers also derive pleasure from crafting the performance itself. They often report that it is a very fulfilling experience to craft beautiful sentences, for instance. Attractors always go by that internal sense of enjoyment. So the stories that they write, they usually have a lot of content that gives the attractor a very good internal experience, right? And so they are going to try and write more books that give them an internal experience. And that usually results in the books that attractor writers write to be more or less the same style, the same genre, the same stuff is going on in them because they chase that same internal reaction that they can give themselves through their writing again and again, because they really prioritize their own comfort zone. And the point of that is that since they are repeating the same process and the same methods over and over again, they become better at this and they refine their methods and they develop systems. Except the skill set they acquire is usually highly specific to the type of story that they usually write, to the type of story that is within their comfort zone. Impactors, however, when they write a book, they have no idea if they will want to do a similar project in the future. So they don't aim to refine methods and techniques for later use, but rather they try to learn all the necessary skills that they need to achieve whatever they're working on right now.
You learn to write the book that you're writing. As you're writing it, it's like a thing that you learn how to do, and then you finished it and you have a set of skills that you can sort of apply to other things, but you really only learned how to write that one book.
Yep.
And you're like, maybe I will try that again. And then you're like, nope, now I got to learn how to write this book. Well, this is ridiculous.
This is also why impactors often branch out and try new genres and styles, because they think that staying inside a comfort zone is boring. The attractor writers, they always want to give themselves the same level of pleasant experience, and that is basically them building their own comfort zone, and they don't really want to leave that comfort zone. But the impactors just don't do that. They usually prioritize having a lot of skill and having a lot of tools in their toolbox and a lot of skills in their skill set, basically. So they actually tend to branch out. I want to talk about Miguel, a good buddy of mine, extremely knowledgeable about writing, and he has very strong extroverted sensing. And he told me about how he improves his performance. He says he's always on the look for new and unexpected ways to write, and he gets inspiration from even self-help books for their direct and involving writing style, which is full of second-person point of view, for instance. Or he reads financial reports to borrow the authoritative vocabulary. He's searching for new ways to experiment and sculpt the audience's reaction. Another difference can be observed in how impactors and attractors enjoy a performance. This is actually a really interesting point. While attractors focus on their internal physical experience, which the performance gives them, the impactors are far more aware of everybody else's experience. And this includes the audience's experience when watching a performance. But it also includes noticing the effort that a performer has put into his or her performance. What do I mean with that? If you're an impactor, aka an extroverted sensing user, then you will enjoy a good performance not so much because it gives you a feeling and you're all about that feeling, but rather you will admire it for all the effort and talent and skill that you see in that performance. And of course also because of the reaction that it creates in an audience. So if you tend to not experience an internal sense of enjoyment so much, but you're far more appreciative of an author's mastery, then you are likely an impactor. Alright, so what is performance? What falls under the umbrella of performance? Everything that gives a physical sensation to the audience for the sake of creating a lasting impact. And in a secondary sense, it should create loyalty. It should get people to trust the author's skill, basically, and their capabilities. It should make the audience feel like they are in good hands, like their investment is in good hands. However, they don't always achieve that in the way that they want. And actually, in a lot of times, young impactor writers or impactor writers who just started out, they really don't know how to actually do that, and they actually lose the trust of the audience. And this is exactly what we are going to talk about in the next point. But let's continue here with the vectors that have been observed, which can be performance. Prose, obviously, making the prose lyrical, poetic, or otherwise impressive. Similes fall under this, for instance. A lot of really good impactor writers use a lot of similes because they're just a performative tool. Making the text flow well in order to not bore the reader, that is also performance. Tension and suspense is obviously performance because it gives the reader an internal experience, of course, right? Pacing is part of performance, but also offensive material, for instance, like anything shocking, like sex or gore or controversial stuff, simply because it is attention grabbing. Extroverted sensing is always trying to grab attention. It's always trying to have the most skill in order to grab the most attention and in order to be able to direct the flow of attention. Extroverted sensing users are also very aware of the flow of attention around them, and when they write, they actually never forget to include the flow of attention of every character, right? And attractors, of course, often forget that stuff. Surprising the reader is also part of performance. How does that work? Well, impactors understand that if they fall into the trap of using overused cliches and tropes, their stories will become boring and predictable. They therefore are invested in observing the field and knowing what is currently in or out, what is overused, and where is an opportunity to give audiences something fresh. And lastly, of course, adding illustrations, musical accompaniment, or other physical performances. Impactors often become animators, game designers, filmmakers, cartoon writers, but also like orators, for instance, right? Or puppeteers. Alright, so now let's look at the mistakes that can be done by impactor writers in the name of performance. No matter if they're young or if they've just started out, these are mistakes I keep seeing, and that is why I need to address them. So first of all, the isolated performance. We can effectively sum up most of the mistakes impactors do with performance under this point. You observe a performance and you focus on aspects of it that you believe are significant, or you simply want to obtain that specific capability and then you are unaware of all the other factors that contributed to the performance as a whole. One version of this is something I keep seeing from impactors who are in the earlier stages of their writing journey. They try to make every single sentence as beautiful and attention-grabbing as possible. Reading such a text is like looking at beautiful flowers in a garden, except there is no grass and the entire garden is just the most beautiful flowers. This has a negative effect for the story, as the reader has no idea where to place their attention, as nothing sticks out anymore. If even the simplest sentences, like a character is walking across a room, suddenly becomes golden prose that tries to grab the reader's attention, then the reader has no idea what is actually important in the story. It's more poetry than narrative, and it's actually quite exhausting for the reader.
Like those specificity of words, like to me that's a huge part of the joy of language. But when I started out writing, I had this notion that every word in a novel could matter the way every word in a poem matters. Now, that was a long time ago, and I've grown up, and it's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting for the reader, not just the writer. And I've sort of learned to balance that, but it still matters so much to me what every word performs in a story.
Another thing I keep seeing from impactors is this storytelling mode of a grandpa tells a tale at a campfire. Every sentence is crafted and beautiful, and the story is just dead boring because the writer focuses only on the prose and not on tension and suspense and all these other aspects of performance. A performance is often comprised of many different factors that all work together in concert. The audience, for instance, also plays a crucial part. Not every audience reacts the same way. And to create the ultimate performance, you also need a specific audience who will receive that performance. Mistake number 2, no desirability. This point is why you, dear impactors, should glean some tricks and methods from the attractors. Impactors really wish to give a powerful experience to anyone who dares to expose themselves to it. However, since they are not attractors, they're not so eager to try and get people to read it. Your brains work in such a way that you focus only on crafting the entire performance, and you sort of assume that a reader will expose themselves to all of it. It's like, I'm giving this amazing performance, I deserve for you to expose yourself to all of it, because otherwise you're not getting the experience that I want to be giving you, right? They're basically forcing the experience onto the audience. In other words, they don't really care so much about the desirability of their story, because the impactor brain says, if my performance is impactful enough, it will be desirable. But that is not the case. Impactor writers who start out usually have really small audiences because they fail to properly make the audience want to read their piece. An example would be an impactor writer who writes a beautiful text wall description and nobody reads it because he fails to create dopamine within the audience's brain. All they get is the poetry of the language, but nothing else happens beyond the visible. There is so much writing advice out there which is looking at story structure, how to make characters likable, how to get audiences invested, how to write a character arc. Always make your paragraphs and sentences do at least 2 things at the same time. I'm gonna write a video about that as well. Always make sure that some emotional value is at stake and that it changes during the scene. Setup and payoff, how to execute a proper twist. There is enough writing advice for desirability. And these are the things that impactor writers who start out writing always ignore. They tend to view the problem as, I just need to make sure that I don't bore the audience. If they're not bored, they're gonna keep reading because the performance is so amazing. So they resort to things with shock value, like meaningless sex or gore, or they constantly put their characters under pressure or torture them in order to give the audience a physical experience. As long as they're not bored, they're gonna keep reading. Or you try to impress with your prose or some other aspect of performance, and here we would be back with the previous point. You need to learn that a proper performance needs to be desirable as well. And with the attractors, it's basically the same, right? If they think that their story is really desirable, then it must have had an impact on the audience. But they do not actively train themselves to write in an impactful way. And that can screw them over. And it can lead to the attractors writing stories that are very predictable and that just don't stick in the minds of the audience. Mistake number 3. No practice and routine. As an impactor, you are constantly on the look for new styles and performances and stylistic tools to add to your repertoire so you can experiment with them and see what creates a better reaction. Discipline very much just isn't natural for impactors, and neither is keeping a routine of repetition and practice. That's all attached to the introverted sensing function, which is what the attractors have. Your extroverted sensing gives you an incentive to practice something, but you usually stop practicing when you've given a good performance and gotten a good reaction, or until you've performed better than someone else, or you've won that little competition in your hometown that you wanted to win, and then you're already on the look for something new. Impactors just have a tendency to not really get into routine and to not repeat their performances. And this is definitely something that impactors can learn from attractors. Routine and repetition are key components of what makes you really skillful. They also don't really like to stay within their comfort zone, which is why they don't have repetition and routine on their side. They also lack the discipline to have repetition and routine. I talked about Miguel earlier and how Miguel is always on the look for new pros. Well, he runs in the risk of getting caught up in this behavior and never actually mastering a specific style or prose. Mistake number 4, your performance anxiety causes writer's block. An impactor might feel a specific case of writer's block, where they generally assume that their skill just isn't good enough, so they might shy away from even trying for fear of exposing an inferior presentation to audiences. You just need to get over that. Show your writing to audiences, get feedback, and ignore the fact that you are cringing when you do it. Alright, so now let's look at some techniques that I have observed that writers use to train their performance. Number 1, you can copy a text from a performance that you admire. This is actually a big piece of advice. Take something you like from an author whose performance you think is good, a passage or a plot, and write the exact same thing. Write it literally word for word. This is like copying a move from a martial artist in order for you to try and replicate his performance in order to improve your skill. This is practice. One impactor writer told this to me. When I'm reading books, I have a document where I will copy down passages that I think were worded well or that have interesting descriptions. And that's kind of how I taught myself, by copying others. Copy work is a method in which you write an author's exact phrasing to get in the feel of how the author did it. It has to do with kinesthetic learning by doing. You can also print out what you have written or read it out aloud, because merely having written something oftentimes obscures mistakes and flaws in prose and performance, simply because there is no threat of leaving a bad impression with anybody. So print out your story to give it that sense of, I'm real now and people could find me and read me, or read it aloud to yourself or read it in front of a crowd. You will automatically find all the flaws in your writing that you wouldn't otherwise. Read reactions and gain feedback. As an impactor, you might be in awe of somebody else's performance, their mechanical mastery and command of the craft, but don't forget to pay attention to what effect a performance has on an audience. The audience makes the successful writer, not the critics. When practicing your performance, always make sure that you are guided by the reactions of your audience. They are ultimately the number 1 tool in your toolbox of honing your performance. Practice describing things in your environment. This advice actually comes straight from Ernest Hemingway himself. Go out into the world, sit down and practice describing what you see. Things, but also people, and especially facial expressions. Use dictionaries, or you can watch a movie and pause it at times and then try to describe the scene. Learn to orchestrate the experience. The really good performances require a lot of preparation, not just skill. In a novel, you can't just surprise the reader with a shocking moment. You have to build everything up to that. You have to strategically place the pieces on the board so that everything comes crashing down on the reader at once. A good example for this is Jordan Peele's Get Out, where oftentimes things happen without the audience being confused, just because the right pieces have been put into place.
If somebody tells me, hey, you shouldn't have this happen in the movie because it's too violent. What I don't do is go in and change my movie and take out the violence. What I do is ask myself, so how can I put in something earlier that makes that violence feel better?
Experiment by adding or subtracting elements to modify the experience, and then try to create the best possible experience that way. Learn music. Several high-profile writers claim that they have a specific relation to music and that they use the sound of music to influence their writing. Samuel Beckett is known to listening to Beethoven and trying to reproduce his music in his writings. Alright, that's it for this video. There are many more techniques in the realm of performance, and I hope I'll get to making more videos in that direction for Season 5. In fact, my plan is to slowly fill up Season 5 with more and more videos relating to desirability and performance, and to at some point have like more than 100 videos in here. Next week, however, I think I'll start with Season 2, which is about characters, and I hope I'll see you in all my future videos.